Welcome to St. John the Beloved Disciples Parish presentation of Catholic 101 series on the book of Genesis. The focus for this presentation will be on the patriarchs Jacob and Joseph, covering Genesis 27:1 through Genesis 50:26. To get the most out of this presentation, have your Bible with you to read for yourself the biblical quotations we will study.
Our opening prayer will be New Birth in Christ. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen. Praise be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ. He who in his great mercy gave us new birth, a birth unto hope which draws its life from the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead, a birth to an imperishable inheritance, incapable of fading or defilement, which is kept in heaven for you, who are guarded with God's power through faith, a birth to a salvation which stands ready to be revealed in the last days. Amen. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen.
The main presenter for this session is myself, Debbie Sayer, along with Kathy Boyer and Father Rich. And we're going to start with Genesis chapter 25, 27, and I'm going to read this account because it's pretty important. If you remember, we had the last time we had the birth of Esau and Jacob to Isaac and Rebekah. And I'm going to read starting at 27. As the boys grew up, Esau became a skillful hunter, a man who lived in the open, whereas Jacob was a simple man who kept to his tents. Isaac preferred Esau because he was fond of game, but Rebekah preferred Jacob. Once, when Jacob was cooking a stew, Esau came in from the open famished. He said to Jacob, "Let me gulp down some of that red stuff. I'm starving." That is why he was called Edom. But Jacob replied, "First give me your birthright in exchange for it." "Look," said Esau, "I'm on the point of dying. What good will any birthright do me?" But Jacob insisted, "Swear to me first." So he sold Jacob his birthright under oath. Jacob then gave him some bread and the lentil stew, and Esau ate, drank, got up, and went his way. Esau cared little for his birthright. Goodness. Isn't that a big deal at this time?
It's a very big deal because the eldest son should be the recipient of the birthright, and that means everything. And that means then he would be expected to divide it with his siblings, in this case with his brother Jacob. But as it says, he didn't care about any of that stuff. And so he simply said, "It's worthless to me. I'm hungry. I'm starving to death. I need the food. You want it? You got it." Jacob made sure by saying, "Swear to me." And that really, is the background to what happens next when the sons come to their father Isaac to be blessed as Isaac is preparing to die.
Right. So if we move on to Genesis 27, Jacob's deception, I'm going to read, I'll start at the beginning and we'll kind of jump in when you need to, Father. Chapter 27, verse 1. When Isaac was so old that his eyesight had failed him, he called his older son Esau and said to him, "Son." "Yes, father," he replied. Isaac then said, "As you can see, I am so old that I may now die at any time. Take your gear, therefore, your quiver and bow, and go out into the country to hunt some game for me. With your catch, prepare an appetizing dish for me, such as I like, and bring it to me to eat, so that I may give you my special blessing before I die." Rebekah had been listening while Isaac was speaking to his son Esau. So when Esau went out into the country to hunt some game for his father, Rebekah said to her son Jacob, "Listen, I overheard your father tell your brother Esau, 'Bring me some game, and with it prepare an appetizing dish for me to eat, that I may give you my blessing with the Lord's approval before I die.' Now, son, listen carefully to what I tell you. Go to the flock and get me 2 choice kids. With these I will prepare an appetizing dish for your father, such as he likes. Then bring it to your father to eat, that he may bless you before he dies. But my brother Esau is a hairy man, said Jacob to his mother Rebekah, and I am smooth-skinned. Suppose my father feels me. He will think I am making sport of him, and I shall bring on myself a curse instead of a blessing. His mother, however, replied, Let any curse against you, son, fall on me. Just do as I say. Go and get me the kids. So Jacob went and got them and brought them to his mother, and with them she prepared an appetizing dish such as his father liked. Rebekah then took the best clothes of her older son Esau that she had in the house and gave them to her younger son Jacob to wear, and with the skins of the kids she covered up his hands and the hairless parts of his neck. Then she handed her son Jacob the appetizing dish and the bread she had prepared. Bringing them to his father, Jacob said, Father. Yes, replied Isaac. Which of my sons are you? Jacob answered his father, I am Esau, your firstborn. I did as you told me. Please sit up and eat some of my game so that you may give me your special blessing. But Isaac asked, How did you succeed so quickly, son? He answered, The Lord your God let things turn out well with me. Isaac then said to Jacob, Come closer, son, that I may feel you to learn whether you really are my son Esau or not. So Jacob moved up closer to his father. When Isaac felt him, he said, Although the voice is Jacob's, the hands are Esau's. He failed to identify him because his hands were hairy like those of his brother Esau. So in the end, he gave him his blessing. Again he asked him, Are you really my son Esau? Certainly, he replied. Then Isaac said, Serve me your game, son, that I may eat of it and then give you my blessing. Jacob served it to him, and Isaac ate. He brought him wine, and he drank. Finally his father Isaac said to him, Come closer, son, and kiss me. As Jacob went up and kissed him, Isaac smelled the fragrance of his clothes. With that he blessed him. Should I keep going?
I'd read the blessing.
Read the blessing, okay. The fragrance of my son is like the fragrance of a field that the Lord has blessed. May God give to you of the dew of the heavens and the fertility of the earth, abundance of grain and wine. Let people serve you and nations pay you homage. Be master of your brothers, and may your mother's son bow down to you. Cursed be to those who curse you, and blessed be those who bless you.
Okay, not only does he have Esau's birthright, now he has Esau's blessing. And so he's getting this blessing, which gives him all these things. So when Esau later shows up and comes in, and Isaac realizes what he's done, how he's been tricked, there's nothing left to give Esau. And in fact, we can see that at the end, later in this chapter, where it says, get down there, I can read this. Esau said to his father, Have you what one blessing, father? Bless me, even me also, my father. And Esau lifted up his voice and said, and his father Isaac answered him, Behold, away from the fatness of the earth shall your dwelling be, and away from the dew of heaven on high. By your sword you shall live, and you shall serve your brother. But when you break loose, you shall break his yoke from your neck. That's not much of a blessing. No, he's definitely in second place, even though he is the firstborn. And this is one of those things we see throughout the book of Genesis. God is constantly doing reversals. He's blessing the younger son in preference to the elder son. And this is one of the classic cases of it. It also establishes one other thing. You get a glimpse into the character of Jacob, who is deceitful, and his name originally meant trickster. And this is one of the examples here. Now, he didn't do it himself. He had his mother allied with him. It was her idea, but he was quite willing and very successful at doing it.
Well, and it says next that, Esau bore Jacob a grudge. Well, goodness, I would think so, wouldn't you?
Oh, definitely.
So when Rebekah got news of what her older son Esau had in mind, she called her younger son Jacob and said to him, Listen, your brother Esau intends to settle accounts with you by killing you. Therefore, son, do what I tell you. Flee at once to my brother Laban in Haran and stay with him a while until your brother's fury subsides.
Yeah, and that's exactly what happens. But there's two things going on here. The first is get him out of town so he can save his life. The second is send him to Laban, because if he's going to have a wife, I want it to come from that clan.
Right, because Esau married outside the clan.
Yes, and that was to his disgrace, whereas this would be to Jacob's blessing. So now he's hitting the road,
Right.
and so he's going to have to make a journey in a hurry, because he doesn't want Esau to catch up with him, because that could be very bad.
Right.
So he's on the road, and he's going to end up at Bethel.
Right. On his way on the road, he stops. It says, it's chapter 28, verse 10. Jacob departed from Beersheba and proceeded to Haran. When he came upon a certain shrine, as the sun had already set, he stopped there for the night. Taking one of the stones of the shrine, he put under his head and lay down to sleep at that spot. Then he had a dream. A stairway rested on the ground with its top reaching to the heavens, and God's messengers were going up and down on it. And there was the Lord standing beside him and saying, I, the Lord, am the God of your forefather Abraham and the God of Isaac. The land on which you are lying I will give to you and your descendants. These shall be as plentiful as the dust of the earth, and through them you shall spread out east and west, north and south. In you and your descendants all the nations of the earth shall find blessing. Know that I am with you. I will protect you wherever you go and bring you back to this land. I will never leave you until I have done what I promised you. When Jacob awoke from his sleep, he proclaimed, Truly the Lord is in this spot, although I did not know it. In solemn wonder he cried out, How awesome is this shrine! This is nothing else but an abode of God, and that is the gateway to heaven.
The stairway to heaven, the ladder, Jacob's ladder, these are all images that come out of this account. But also the blessing of God.
Yeah, he got a good blessing.
He got a very good blessing. And this is after he deceived his brother and did something that was, by all custom of the people at that time, very, very wrong. But God blessed it.
But yeah, it was almost like it's part of God's plan to make this happen.
Right.
And it is God's plan.
Yeah.
This was the way God wanted it to work out, but he's doing it in a rather twisted way. But here we are. Who's to question God? This is what God did.
So it said that the next morning he took the stone and set it up as a memorial stone and poured oil on it and called the site Bethel.
Yeah, and again, that pouring the oil as a way of consecrating it and saying this is a special holy place. God was here with me. And that would be, over the years, there would always be a shrine at Bethel. And sometimes that would be in competition to the temple in Jerusalem. So he gets out of town, he heads on the road, and then he eventually arrives in Laban's area.
Yeah, he meets on his way. He comes on a well, and there's a big rock on the well, and I guess it takes all the shepherds to move the rock.
Mm-hmm.
But he sees Rachel, and he thinks Rachel's so beautiful, and he's so excited. He moves the rock by himself.
Mm-hmm.
So.
And so then that gets Rachel's attention. She ends up going home early because she could water the flock more quickly than usual. And her father Laban asked him, how come you're here so fast?
Right.
So there was this man there and helped move the rock, and he helped me water my flock. So everything's fine, Father. And Laban's saying, who was this guy?
Yeah.
Why didn't you bring him here?
On chapter 29, verse 15. After Jacob had stayed with him a full month, Laban said to him, should you serve me for nothing just because you are a relative of mine? Tell me what your wages should be.
Now, pause here for a moment. He doesn't work for wages. He's working for bigger something.
Okay.
And it's very important something. But watch what happens to the trickster, because he needs a greater trickster.
He gets it honestly, right?
Yeah, because this is his uncle, remember?
Yeah, this is his
Yeah.
Uncle Laban, and so
Yeah.
like uncle like nephew, or in this case like nephew like uncle.
Runs in the family, huh?
Laban had 2 daughters. The older was called Leah, the younger Rachel. Leah had lovely eyes, but Rachel was well-formed and beautiful. Since Jacob had fallen in love with Rachel, he answered Laban, I will serve you 7 years for your younger daughter Rachel. Laban replied, I prefer to give her to you rather than an outsider. Stay with me. So Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, yet they seemed to him but a few days because of his love for her. Then Jacob said to Laban, give me my wife that I may consummate my marriage with her, for my term is now completed. So Laban invited all the local inhabitants and gave a feast. At nightfall, he took his daughter Leah and brought her to Jacob, and Jacob consummated the marriage with her.
Now pause here a moment.
So he got Jacob drunk, basically.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, they partied and that, and a lot of wine is flowing, so, and the tent is dark, he's not paying a lot of attention, and this is great, first night with my new bride, and he wakes up in the morning and said, wait a minute.
This is not the right sister. Laban assigned his slave girl Zilpah to his daughter Leah as her maidservant. In the morning, Jacob was amazed. It was Leah, so he cried out to Laban, "How could you do this to me? Was it not for Rachel that I served you? Why did you dupe me?" "It is not the custom in our country," Laban replied, "to marry off a younger daughter before an older one. Finish the bridal week for this one, and then I will give you the other two in return for another 7 years of service with me." So he gets another 7 years out of him. But it says, what's a bridal week? I mean, is it like 7 days? Or
Yeah, it would be a day. You know,
So they
it's kind of like the
party
honeymoon.
Party the whole week?
Why not? People go on honeymoons today, don't they?
Well, that's true. That's true. He finished the bridal week for Leah, and then Laban gave him his daughter Rachel in marriage. Laban assigned his slave girl Bilhah to his daughter Rachel as a maidservant. Jacob then consummated his marriage with Rachel also, and he loved her more than Leah. Thus he remained in Laban's servant another 7 years.
Yeah, and see, that's the background, how he ended up with 2 wives. Now.
And each wife has a maidservant. That's a thing to
right.
remember.
And that's something to remember, because then we're going to get into the growth of his descendants.
Yeah, we get into like the baby wars.
It's a race.
So, yeah. So, should I read or just kind of summarize?
Well, we just kind of read it through.
Okay. When the Lord saw that Leah was unloved, he made her fruitful, while Rachel remained barren. Leah conceived and bore a son, and she named him Reuben, for she said, "It means, the Lord saw my misery, now my husband will love me." She conceived again and bore a son, and said, "It means, the Lord heard that I was unloved, and therefore he has given me this one also." So she named him Simeon. Again she conceived and bore a son, and she said, "Now at last my husband will become attached to me, since I have now borne him 3 sons. That is why she named him Levi. Once more she conceived and bore a son, and said, "This time I will give grateful praise to the Lord." Therefore she named him Judah. Then she stopped bearing children.
Okay, so you have a situation, the first wife has 4 sons. The second wife, nothing's happened so far.
Right.
So now let's see how the second wife responds, because she's seen enough, she's going to take action.
Right. When Rachel saw that she failed to bear children to Jacob, she became envious of her sister. She said to Jacob, "Give me children or I shall die." In anger, Jacob retorted, "Can I take the place of God, who has denied you the fruit of the womb?" She replied, "Here is my maidservant Bilhah. Have intercourse with her and let her give birth on my knees, so that I too may have offspring, at least through her." So she gave him her maidservant Bilhah as a consort, and Jacob had intercourse with her. When Bilhah conceived and bore a son, Rachel said, "God has vindicated me. Indeed, he has heeded my plea and given me a son." Therefore she named him Dan. Rachel's maidservant Bilhah conceived again and bore a second son, and Rachel said, "I engaged in a fateful struggle with my sister, and I prevailed." She named him Naphtali. So now they're in like a baby.
Well, then there's going to be a next step.
Yeah, when Leah saw that she had ceased to bear children, she gave her maidservant Zilpah to Jacob as a consort. So Jacob had intercourse with Zilpah, and she conceived and bore a son. Leah then said, "What good luck!" So she named him Gad. Then Leah's maidservant Zilpah bore a second son to Jacob, and Leah said, "What good fortune," meaning women call me fortunate, so she named him Asher. One day during, we'll stop here.
Stop there just for a moment. So so Jacob has 2 wives, and now he has 2 consorts. And so far, everybody's had children. Leah 4, the 2 consorts each have 2, so he has 8 sons. That's a pretty good family right there. But we're not done yet. There's more to come. Then we pick up at verse 14.
One day during the wheat harvest, when Reuben was out in the field, he came upon some mandrakes which he brought home to his mother Leah. Rachel asked Leah, "Please let me have some of your son's mandrakes." Leah replied, "Was it not enough for you to take away my husband, that you must now take my son's mandrakes too?" Very well then, Rachel answered. In exchange for your son Mandrake, Jacob may lie with you tonight. That evening when Jacob came home from the fields, Leah went out to meet him. You are now to come in with me, she told him, because I have paid for you with my son's mandrakes. So that night he slept with her, and God heard her prayer, and she conceived and bore a fifth son to Jacob. Leah then said, God has given me my reward for having let my husband have my maidservant. So she named him Issachar. Leah conceived again and bore a sixth son to Jacob, and she said, God has brought me a precious gift. This time my husband will offer me presents, now that I have borne him 6 sons. So she named him Zebulun. Finally she gave birth to a daughter, and she named her Dinah. Then God remembered Rachel. He heard her prayer and made her fruitful. She conceived and bore a son, and she said, God has removed my disgrace. So she named him Joseph, meaning may the Lord add another son to this one for me.
Yeah.
He's the important one.
It gets kind of like a race.
Right.
And it's almost like it's a business thing rather than love. But see, again, that was part of the deal in marriage, because it was the expectation that a wife, if she was blessed, would bear many sons for her father. Daughters, well, that's okay. But the sons are really the ones that counted, because they would be much more useful in the fields. If need be, they could be warriors in battle. There's a lot of practical considerations here. So there was kind of a business sense of this. It kind of sounds harsh, but there's a practical side of this a great deal. And so a sign of a person's status would be the number of their sons. And so in this case, Jacob's got very high status. At this point, he has 11 sons. That's huge. And any day, but he's not done yet. There will be a 12th, but that's going to come very much later.
So Jacob has worked for Laban for 14 years, had 2 wives, and another 6 more years for a total of 20 years altogether, and he has 11 sons, not counting any of his daughters. And Jacob wants to go home to fulfill the dream he had at Bethel. And Jacob and Laban realizes he's going to lose a good worker who's been a blessing, and Laban will also have to compensate Jacob for his hard work. So Jacob and Laban make a bargain that Laban will give Jacob all the dark sheep and spotted goats. And here Jacob is the trickster again. They separate the flock, and Jacob takes Laban's off, and Laban's sons take Jacob's off, and they separate them. And Jacob, he breeds the goats and sheep selectively, so they come out looking like he wants it to for his flock. And it causes some big like suspicion and distrust between Jacob and Laban and Laban's sons.
Yeah, it gets a little more, shall we say, it's almost kind of like using magic charms or something here.
Yeah.
It's in the fresh rods of poplar with almond and plain, peeled off white streaks in them, exposed the white on the rods, so the rods were dark and white, and the goats and the sheep see this and feel, voila, their offsprings come out looking like that.
Dark and spotted, and yeah.
And all of a sudden his flocks are increasing greatly, and Laban's aren't, and Laban's saying what's going on.
Right. And Jacob sends for his wives, his sons, and his servants. He tells his wives what's happening, and for the very first time, it seems like, the wives agree that their father has been unfair, and they want to, favor their husband. So I think that's a red letter day for them. The family flees, and Laban pursues them for 7 days, but he has a dream warning him not to interfere with Jacob. They meet, and Laban decides to make a covenant with Jacob, and they erect a stone pillar and share a meal. Both men give a name to the place in their own language to signify the pact. Jacob calls it, is it Gilead?
Gilead.
Gilead? Okay. So Jacob, at this point, we're in Genesis 32, verse 45. No, not 45. We need to.
That's done there.
Well, I mean, at this point, Jacob and Laban have made a pact, and they're going to go on their separate ways, and Jacob is going to go home, but he knows that he needs to protect his family.
He also knows he's going to have to face his brother.
Esau, right.
He's very fearful of this.
Right. So he sends a messenger to Esau, and he
With gifts.
yeah, lots of gifts, like lots of livestock and all this other stuff, and Jacob is frightened because he gets the messengers. It says, when the messengers returned to Jacob, they said, "We reached your brother Esau. He is now coming to meet you, accompanied by 400 men."
Whoops.
That's a lot.
That does not sound good.
So Jacob arranges his wives, maids, and children by importance.
Mm-hmm.
So, to me, I mean, that would make me, I guess, if I wasn't towards the back, I think I would be a little upset with my dad or husband or whatever.
Yes,
I don't think so.
Yeah, but Rachel's a lot more important than Leah, so you know where
Yeah.
And
So-
Zoha and Zilpah, yeah, they're back there too, even further back probably. So it's just kind of a status thing.
Right, so Jacob separates his families into two parties, and he sends them both ahead of him, and he stays behind. And does it say where he is when he has this next?
At Peniel.
Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so in chapter 32, verse 23,
Mm-hmm.
in the course of the night, however, Jacob arose, took his 2 wives and with the 2 maidservants and his 11 children, and crossed the ford of the Jabbok. After he had taken them across the stream and had brought over all his possessions, Jacob was left there alone. Then some man wrestled with him until the break of dawn. When the man saw that he could not prevail over him, he struck Jacob's hip at its socket, so that the hip socket was wrenched as they wrestled. The man then said, "Let me go, for it is daybreak." But Jacob said, "I will not let you go until you bless me." "What is your name?" the man asked. He answered, "Jacob." Then the man said, "You shall no longer be spoken of as Jacob, but as Israel, because you have contended with divine and human beings and have prevailed."
Now that's the meaning of the name. You have contended with divine and human beings and have prevailed. You're no longer the trickster.
You no longer.
Now you're one who has wrestled with God and prevailed.
Jacob then asked, "Do tell me your name, please." He answered, "Why should you want to know my name?" With that, he bade him farewell. Jacob named the place what'd you call
Peniel.
it? Peniel. "Because I have seen God's face. I have seen God face to face," he said, "yet my life has been spared." At sunrise, as he left Peniel, Jacob limped along because of his hip. That is why to this day the Israelites do not eat the sciatic muscle that is on the hip socket, inasmuch as Jacob's hip socket was struck at the sciatic muscle.
Again, this is an explanation for a Jewish custom. It goes
Right.
back to Jacob.
Right.
And the other thing on this is the point that when you wrestle with God, you will come away wounded.
Okay.
And so Jacob would be disabled in this sense for the rest of his life. But he was a changed man, indicated by his name change. All these things, they might sound small. In other words, he's getting a different nickname. No, he's got a totally different identity. He's a new man now. He's no longer the trickster. And so then, after all this, Jacob and Esau had their meeting.
Right, chapter 33.
Mhm.
Jacob looked up and saw Esau coming, accompanied by 400 men. So he divided his children among Leah, Rachel, and the 2 maidservants, putting the maids and their children first, Leah and her children next, and Rachel and Joseph last.
Mhm.
He himself went on ahead of them, bowing to the ground 7 times until he reached his brother. Esau ran to meet him, embraced him, and flinging himself on his neck, kissed him as he wept. When Esau looked about, he saw the women and children. "Who are these with you?" he asked. Jacob answered, "They are the children whom God has graciously bestowed on your servant." Then the maidservants and their children came forward and bowed low. Next, Leah and her children came forward and bowed low. Lastly, Rachel and her children came forward and bowed low. Then Esau asked, "What did you intend with all those droves that I encountered?" Jacob answered, "It was to gain my Lord's favor." "I have plenty," replied Esau. "You should keep what is yours, brother." "No, I beg you," said Jacob, "if you will do me the favor, please accept this gift from me, since to come into your presence is for me like coming into the presence of God. Now that you have received me so kindly, do accept the present I have brought you. God has been generous toward me, and I have an abundance." Since he so urged him, Esau accepted.
Okay, and again, that's a point of honor. This is an
So-
honor culture. If I offer a gift,
Right?
honor me by accepting the gift.
So does this mean at this point that Esau is forgiving his brother?
Sounds like it. In other words, there is a reconciliation here. Things turned out okay. Because again, the birthright wasn't that big to him. But still, in spite of not receiving his father's blessing in its fullness, he's able to prosper. And for him, apparently, that's good enough.
Yeah.
So that this rivalry has been resolved, and that's pretty much, they were going to go their own separate ways
Yeah.
now and live in peace.
Yeah.
So it's a nice ending of the story at this point. But there's
Right.
a few more things about Jacob, and then we'll move on from him.
Should I keep reading or?
Jacob coming to Shechem, not so much, but when we get over to chapter 35, the return to Bethel.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Chapter 35, 1.
And then we also get into the birth of Benjamin. It's
Right.
been all followed in there, so these are important points.
Okay. God said to Jacob, "Go up now to Bethel, settle there, and build an altar there to the God who appeared to you while you were fleeing from your brother Esau." So Jacob told his family and all the others who were with him, "Get rid of the foreign gods that you have among you, then purify yourselves and put on fresh clothes. We are now to go up to Bethel, and I will build an altar there to the God who answered me in my hour of distress, and who has been with me wherever I have gone." They therefore handed over to Jacob all the foreign gods in their possession, and also the rings they had in their ears. Then as they set out, a terror from God fell upon the towns round about, so that no one pursued the sons of Jacob. Thus Jacob and all the people who were with him arrived in Luz, that is Bethel, in the land of Canaan. There he built an altar and named the place Bethel, for it was there that God had revealed himself to him when he was fleeing from his brother. Death came to Rebekah's nurse Deborah. That stuff isn't, well, she was buried under the oak below Bethel, and so it is called Elon Bakuth.
Now, let's pause there a minute. There was a part in there that we kind of skimmed over, and that is, now there's going to be a need for them to kind of solely focus on one God. Before, they still had all these foreign gods that they had with them, the rings and the other tokens of devotion to these other gods. So it's kind of a mixed mash of gods here.
Right.
And now Jacob is saying, we can't do that anymore. This is our God. The rest of this has to be set aside, forgotten, and we're moving on. And so he collected all this. And so there's going to be a solitary God here now, rather than a company of gods, which would be the more common experience of people here. So this is going to be in accord with the covenant that God is making with Jacob, that says, I'm going to be your God, and you're going to be my people. It's you and me, buddy. There's no room for anybody else. And then
Verse
pick up at 9, yes.
Yeah. On Jacob's arrival from Paddan Aram, God appeared to him again and blessed him. God said to him, "You whose name is Jacob shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel shall be your name." Thus he named Israel. God also said to him, "I am God Almighty. Be fruitful and multiply. A nation indeed, an assembly of nations shall stem from you, and kings shall issue from your loins. The land I once gave to Abraham and Isaac I now give to you and to your descendants after you will I give this land." Then God departed from him. On the
Now-
site, go ahead.
Now, just pause there for a moment. This is a repetition.
It is,
Yeah, because again, we get Jacob's name being changed. All of a sudden, he's Jacob again. There's two traditions at work here. This is another tradition being played out, but we're all going in the same direction. It's kind of like hearing the same account from a different viewpoint. In other words, you're talking to your grandfather, and he's telling the story one way. You're talking to your grandmother, she's got her own twist on it, and that's what we're seeing in this. So there is a continuity to the stories, but they're being told from two different viewpoints.
Well, in the next section here, starting with verse 16, is when Rachel is pregnant.
Yes, and this.
Then they departed from Bethel, but while they still had some distance to go on the way to Ephrath, Rachel began to be in labor and to suffer great distress. When her pangs were most severe, her midwife said to her, "Have no fear, this time too you have a son." With her last breath, for she was at the point of death, she called him
Benjamin.
Well, it says Benoni.
Mhm.
His father, however, named him Benjamin.
Mhm.
Thus Rachel died, and she was buried on the road to Ephrath, that is Bethlehem. Jacob set up a memorial stone on her grave. So then it says, if you skip down to 23, the sons of Jacob were now 12. The sons of Leah, Reuben, Jacob's firstborn, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, and Zebulun. The sons of Rachel, Joseph and Benjamin. The sons of Rachel's maid, Bilhah, Dan, and Naphtali. The sons of Leah's maid, Zilpah, Gad, and Asher. These are the sons of Jacob who were born to him in Pada Aram.
Mm-hmm. And finally, we come to the death of Isaac.
Yeah. Jacob went home to his father Isaac at Mamre in Kirith Arba. I'm not very good with these.
Yeah,
That
you
is
did well.
Hebron, where Abraham and Isaac had stayed. The lifetime of Isaac was 180 years. Then he breathed his last. After a full life, he died as an old man and was taken to his kinsmen. His sons Esau and Jacob buried him.
Again, you see that togetherness at the end.
Right.
It's right there. And that's pretty much the story of Isaac, and for the greater part, Jacob.
Right. There's
Now,
just
Jacob
a little bit
becomes
more.
there's more in the account, but from this point on, the key man's going to be Joseph.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Because, I mean, chapter 36 is basically the descendants of Esau.
Yeah, we can
So if
start
you want to
that
read that, you can.
Mhm.
So now we're to chapter 37, and that's Joseph. And
Yeah, we're in the
Joseph.
Joseph cycle now.
Yeah.
And here we go again. You know, we got this favorite son who is not quite up to snuff yet.
This is like my favorite story in the Bible. I really love this story.
Mhm.
So, I don't know, do you want me to read it, or you just kind of want me to summarize?
Well, why don't we read it? Because I think in a sense, you get the full picture of Joseph, and what a little spoiled brat he was. At this point, he very much is. And his brothers did not like him at all.
No.
Hmm.
Jacob settled in the land where his father had stayed, the land of Canaan. This is his family history. When Joseph was 17 years old, he was tending the flocks with his brothers. He was an assistant to the sons of his father's wives, Bilhah and Zilpah, and he brought his father bad reports about them. So Joseph was a tattletale.
Yes, indeed.
Israel loved Joseph best of all his sons, for he was the child of his old age, and he made him a long tunic. When his brothers saw that their father loved him best of all his sons, they hated him so much that they would not even greet him. Once Joseph had a dream, which he told to his brothers. "Listen to this dream I had. There we were, binding sheaves in the field, when suddenly my sheaf rose to an upright position, and your sheaves formed a ring around my sheaf and bowed down to it. Are you really going to make yourself king over us?" his brothers asked him, "or impose your rule on us?" So they hated him all the more because of his talk about his dreams. Then he had another dream, and this one too he told to his brothers. "I had another dream," he said. "This time the sun and the moon and 11 stars were bowing down to me." When he also told it to his father reproved him. "What is the meaning of this dream of yours?" he asked. "Can it be that I and your mother and your brothers are to come and bow to the ground before you?" So his brothers were wrought up against him, but his father pondered the matter.
Yes. And so,
At that point, his mother was still alive.
yes, he was. Mm-hmm.
One day when his brothers had gone to pasture their father's flock at Shechem, Israel said to Joseph, "Your brothers, are tending our flocks at Shechem. Get ready, I will send you to them." "I am ready," Joseph answered. "Go then," he replied, "see if all is well with your brothers and the flocks, and bring back word." He sent him off from the valley of Hebron. When Joseph reached Shechem, a man met him as he was wandering about in the fields. "What are you looking for?" the man asked him. "I'm looking for my brothers," he answered. "Could you please tell me where they are tending the flocks?" The man told him, "They have moved on from here. In fact, I heard them say, 'Let us go on to Dothan.'" So Joseph went after his brothers and caught up with them in Dothan. They noticed him from a distance, and before he came up to them, they plotted to kill him. They said to one another, "Here comes that master dreamer. Come on, let us kill him and throw him into one of the cisterns here. We could say that a wild beast devoured him. We shall then see what comes of his dreams." When Reuben heard this, he tried to save him from their hands, saying, "We must not take his life." Instead of shedding blood, he continued, "Just throw him into that cistern there in the desert, but don't kill him outright." His purpose was to rescue him from their hands and restore him to his father. So when Joseph came up to them, they stripped him of the long tunic he had on. Then they took him and threw him into the cistern, which was empty and dry. They then sat down to their meal. Looking up, they saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead.
Notice the Ishmaelites.
Yeah.
Remember Ishmael? These are his descendants.
Okay. Their camels laden with gum, balm, and resin to be taken down to Egypt. Judah said to his brothers, "What is to be gained by killing our brother and concealing his blood? Rather, let us sell him to these Ishmaelites instead of doing away with him ourselves. After all, he is our brother, our own flesh." His brothers agreed. They sold Joseph to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver. At this point in the next one, it's weird because they start talking about different traders. Is that two stories put together again?
Probably, yes. But again, the big thing here is they sold him for 20 shekels of silver, 20 pieces of silver. Echo of Jesus being sold by Judas for 30 pieces of silver. So this is an allusion. This will be seen as an allusion back to that.
Right.
So there's that. And then the whole problem here is now that they got rid of him, how are they going to explain to Dad, where's Joseph?
Right.
So they have to make up this tale. And it falls on Reuben to go and say to his father, he's the firstborn, it's his responsibility. He's supposed to look out for his brothers, especially Dad's favorite. He has to go and explain this to him, except there's not going to be any comfort for Jacob with this at all, because this was his favorite son.
Right. And it says, I mean, they tore his tunic, they killed the goat, they dipped the tunic in the goat blood, they took it back to his dad, and it basically says that Jacob rent his clothes, put sackcloth on his loins, and mourned his sons many days.
Yes.
Though his sons and daughters tried to console him, he refused any consolation.
Yeah, and those are the traditional signs of mourning. Tearing of garments, sackcloth, and so on. So he's deep in mourning.
Right.
This was a huge loss for him. So his other sons have to live with the fact that Dad's in a really bad state. So they go to there.
Well, now that story stops and we come to chapter 38, which is Judah and Tamar.
Let me do a quickie on that one.
Okay, you do it.
Yeah, and
Okay.
that's this. This is really kind of an insert into the saga of Joseph. It doesn't really fit here, but this is where it is. But it's an important story because it establishes the lineage from Judah to King David. And the story is like this, that Tamar marries Judah's oldest son. He's got 3. This son is disliked by God and he dies. Now, in the Jewish tradition, it was the duty then of another brother to take the wife of a widowed by his older brother and take her when there was no children and to raise up a child for this, right, to continue the lineage of the oldest son. Now, the second son doesn't want any part of this. And so he kind of goes through the motions, but he made sure that she doesn't get pregnant. And so God saw us, listen, this guy's canceled out too. Now, it would have been this responsibility of the third son, but Judah, now having lost his 2 older sons, isn't real eager to try this out. And so he keeps delaying it. And so instead, Tamar decides to take action in her own hands. So she goes out along a path, along a road where she knows her father-in-law is going to pass along, and sets herself up as a harlot. And she entices him, he comes to her, they lay together, and she becomes pregnant. And that was the whole idea. And she says, well, where's my fee? And he says, well, I don't have any money with you. He says, well, then give me your staff and other identifying marks. And I'll hold these until you pay me off. And Judah says, well, okay. He does. So he leaves, and she disappears. He doesn't know where she went. So he comes back to pay her off, but she's not there, nobody knows where she went. So he goes, well, what am I supposed to do? So he goes home. Later on, word comes to him that Tamar is pregnant, and she's going to have a child. And he says, that can't be any good thing. So he's ready to kill her because of her illicit sex. And as they're leading her out to be killed, Tamar says, wait a minute, let me show you the possessions the man who did this to me gave to me. And she gets out the staff, the cord, and the other things that Judah had given her, and he says, these belong to that man. They take them to Judah, and Judah says, uh-oh, they're mine.
Oops.
They're mine.
Busted.
Yeah, busted, exactly. And so he has to acknowledge that this is his son. And it's a reflection on him because he did not carry out the Jewish custom. But this establishes the family tree that will eventually lead to one of his far descendants to be King David, which is the great king of Israel and the combined kingdom. And eventually, from a Christian point of view, will be part of Jesus' family tree. It's just that, again, God is using some unlikely events, using people doing things that we would consider, how could you do that? But he makes it all fit into his plan of salvation. So it's kind of a twisted story, but it becomes an important segment of the path of salvation. So then we go back to Joseph.
Joseph, yeah.
And
So
he's in Egypt now, because that's where the caravan took him, and now he ends up with Potiphar for a brief stay. And that's going to be a key to the next step.
right, so
And we did it.
kind of, yeah. So Potiphar makes Joseph his right-hand man kind of thing. But Potiphar's wife really likes Joseph. And
In a full sense.
yeah, and Joseph doesn't go for it, but she complains to Potiphar and gets Joseph thrown in jail. So while Joseph is in jail, he comes to know the royal cupbearer and the baker who had offended the Pharaoh and was in jail. Both of them had dreams, and Joseph interpreted both of them. He tells the cupbearer that, this means that he'll go back to the Pharaoh and everything will be fine, but the poor baker, not so much. And the dreams turn out true. The cupbearer goes back to Pharaoh, and Joseph asks him, please remember me, whenever to Pharaoh so I can get out of here. But the baker, so
Baker is executed.
yeah, yeah. So Pharaoh has these dreams, and the cupbearer remembers Joseph.
Because nobody else can figure out the dreams.
Right.
The 5 fatted calves and then the 5 lean calves eating the 5
Seven,
calves as an
yeah.
example.
Yeah.
And it's a very descriptive dream. And Joseph comes in and says, well, here's what it means.
Right.
And Pharaoh goes, wow.
Right. So it's 7 years of good luck and lots of bountiful harvests, and then 7 years of famine. So we better start saving. So Pharaoh makes Joseph his right-hand man, and they oversee everything, and things are going really well in Egypt. But for Joseph and his brothers, not so much.
Because the famine is worldwide, or at least the worldwide that they're considering.
Right.
It may not have been the whole planet, it probably wasn't, but this one it's a local famine, it's very severe. And there's his brothers and Jacob, his family, they're having a hard time. They don't have food either, but they hear there's food in Egypt. And so Jacob says, sons, go down there and get some food.
But he doesn't send Benjamin.
Exactly.
He keeps Benjamin back because that's his, that's still his son from Rachel, like Joseph was, and he doesn't want anything to happen to him. So when Joseph sees his brothers, he knows who they are. And then he also is reminded of the dreams he had about them. But he like tests his brothers, and he ends up taking Simeon hostage and tells them they need to go back and get their brother Benjamin and bring him with them, so he knows they're not spies.
So he's playing cat and mouse with them. In other words, this is his father's type of a thing. He knows how to manipulate a story.
Right.
He's pulling strings and things like that, and they don't know who this guy is.
They don't recognize him.
They don't recognize him. He's dressed as the right-hand man of Pharaoh, which means he's in a high, exalted thing.
Right.
He never talks to them. and he talks to his interpreter, who talks to them. He speaks Egyptian to the interpreter. The interpreter tells them what the great Lord is saying to them. So they never hear his voice unless they recognize his voice, but he understands everything they're saying.
So they go back and they get Benjamin and they go back to Joseph.
Except they really had a hard time talking the dad out of letting Benjamin go.
Yeah.
Because he does not want him to go, and it's pretty much like, you, if he's killed, I'm dead.
Right.
And they're saying, we'll take care of him, Dad.
Judah steps up and really accepts responsibility. Reuben and Simeon and Levi are all pretty person non grata with their dad, and Judah really steps up and says, you know, I'll take care of this. So they go to meet Joseph, and
Benjamin.
or they go back with Benjamin to meet with Joseph, and Joseph has their bags packed with provisions to take back, but he puts his silver goblet in Benjamin's bag.
He also returned all their money.
Oh, that's right. That happened on the first trip.
That happened on the first trip.
Right.
And so,
Yeah.
but now he set a trap for them
Right.
by putting a silver goblet in.
Right.
Somebody stole my silver goblet. Who's got it? It's in Benjamin's sack.
So he brings him back, and
He searches everything, finds the goblet in Benjamin's back, and his brothers are like, oh no.
yeah, and he finally reveals himself to his brothers. It's in chapter 45. And there was a spot in here where, I can't remember where it was, but that Joseph tells them that God used what they did to him to
Yeah,
get
it's up here.
his...
It's verse 4.
Yeah, come closer to me, he told his brothers. When they had done so, he said, I am your brother Joseph, whom you once sold into Egypt. But now do not be distressed, and do not reproach yourselves for having sold me here. It was really for the sake of saving lives that God sent me here ahead of you. For 2 years now the famine has been in the land, and for 5 more years tillage will yield no harvest. God therefore sent me on ahead of you to ensure for you a remnant on earth and to save your lives in an extraordinary deliverance. So it was really not you, but God who had me come here.
Yeah, but this was the way it happened, and they were involved in it.
Right.
And so that's the whole thing. And then he asks about, what about my father Jacob? And then Pharaoh hears about this because this is a very emotional scene.
Right.
Jacob's very, very emotional about this whole thing. There's a reunion here that's taking place. And so finally then Jacob comes down. They go back to Jacob and says, Joseph's alive. And Jacob says, I gotta see him.
Right.
So he comes down.
So that's in chapter 46.
Yeah.
And it says, Israel set out with all that was his. When he arrived at Beersheba, he offered sacrifices to the God of his father Isaac. There God, speaking to Israel in a vision by night, called, Jacob, Jacob. Here I am, he answered. Then he said, I am God, the God of your father. Do not be afraid to go down to Egypt, for there I will make you a great nation. Not only will I go down to Egypt with you, I will also bring you back here after Joseph has closed your eyes. So Jacob departed from Beersheba, and the sons of Israel put their father and their wives and children on the wagons that Pharaoh had sent for his transport. They took with them all their livestock and the possessions they had in the land of Canaan. Thus Jacob and all his descendants migrated to Egypt.
Yeah.
So
And then-
Pharaoh assisted them.
They were all welcome.
Getting
Right.
back.
In other words, if these are Joseph's family, fine, bring them on, he's my man.
Right. So
So
from
Pharaoh's fine with that.
chapter 46, starting with verse 8, it goes through every single son and their descendants.
And
Oh, it's a lot.
read it at your own risk.
Yeah.
Okay. And then they dwell in the land of Goshen, and then they come out very prosperous with the whole deal because of the way Joseph and the Levites thing. So he's taking care of his family. And so all that, and so the Egyptians get impoverished, and the Hebrews in Egypt are doing very well, thank you very much.
Well-
And then eventually Jacob dies.
Right. But before he dies, it says, chapter 47, verse 27, Thus Israel settled in the land of Egypt in the region of Goshen. There they acquired property, were fertile, and increased greatly. Jacob lived in the land of Egypt for 17 years. The span of his life came to 147 years. When the time approached for Israel to die, he called his son Joseph and said to him, "If you really wish to please me, put your hand under my thigh as a sign of your constant loyalty to me. Do not let me be buried in Egypt. When I lie down with my ancestors, have me taken out of Egypt and buried in their burial place." "I will do as you say," he replied, but his father demanded, "Swear it to me." So Joseph swore to him. Then Israel bowed at the head of the bed.
Mhm. And then the final thing is going to be the last words to his brothers and his
Well,
sons.
he didn't. It hasn't shown where
Oh,
Ephraim
and the sons of Jacob.
and
yes.
Manasseh don't. Yeah.
Mhm.
So Joseph was informed, "Your father is failing," in chapter 48. So he took along with him his two sons Manasseh and Ephraim. When Jacob was told, "Your son Joseph has come to you," he rallied his strength and sat up in bed. And then he said to Joseph, "God Almighty appeared to me at Luz in the land of Canaan, and blessing me, he said, 'I will make you fertile and numerous and raise you into an assembly of tribes, and I will give you this land to your descendants after you as a permanent possession. Your two sons, therefore, who were born to you in the land of Egypt, before I joined you here, shall be mine. Ephraim and Manasseh shall be mine as much as Reuben and Simeon. Progeny born to you after them shall remain yours, but their heritage shall be recorded.'" Okay, let's skip ahead a little bit, because it says, "Bring them to me," at chapter 9. "They are my sons," Joseph answered to his father, "whom God has given me here. Bring them to me," said his father, "that I may bless them." Now Israel's eyes were dim from age, and he could not see well. When Joseph brought his sons close to him, he kissed and embraced them. Then Israel said to Joseph, "I never expected to see your face again, and now God has allowed me to see your descendants." Joseph removed them from his father's knee and bowed down before him with his face to the ground. Then Joseph took the two, Ephraim on his right and to Israel's left, and Manasseh with his left hand to Israel's right, and led them to him. But Israel, crossing his hands, put out his right hand and laid it on the head of Ephraim, although he was the younger, and his left hand on the head of Manasseh, although he was the firstborn, and he blessed them.
And the thing is, the right hand was considered the greater hand, and so that would be the greater blessing, whereas the left would be the lesser. But here again is a crossover.
So he made sure that the younger son
Younger got the better blessing.
just like he did.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Should I read the blessing or go on?
I would let it go because.
Okay. And then in 49, Jacob gives a testament, and he calls all his sons and gathers them around, and he blesses some and
curses
others.
Mhm.
Like, not so good. So.
Mhm. Yeah, it is. The one that's worth reading would be Judah, because he's going to be the most important, though he's the fourth born.
All right.
Again, that starts at verse 8.
"You, Judah, shall your brothers praise, your hand on the neck of your enemies. The sons of your father shall bow down to you. Judah, like a lion's whelp, you have grown up on prey, my son. He crouches like a lion recumbent, the king of beasts. Who would dare rouse him? The scepter shall never depart from Judah, or the mace from between his legs, while tribute is brought to him, and he receives the people's homage. He tethers his donkey to the vine, his purebred ass to the choicest stem. In wine he washes his garments, his robe in the blood of grapes. His eyes are darker than wine, and his teeth are whiter than milk."
There's not going to be a better blessing in this anywhere.
So he's handsome and strong.
He's everything you would hope.
Okay.
The others, well, because of their deeds, they don't come out too good.
Right.
But Judah is considered the one, and of course through Judah, King David would come, and ultimately the Messiah too. So this is going to be the track. And then we're wrapping up at this point.
Yeah. Here's all the 12 tribes of Israel.
Mhm.
And this is what their father said to them.
Yeah.
Okay, we can. Right. And then he dies after he gives his instructions, and Jacob, or the brothers, Joseph and the brothers get together, and they take Jacob's body
to the family plot.
Right.
Given the original land.
Right. So in chapter 50, starting with verse 15, now that their father is dead, Joseph's brothers are really, really concerned that something bad's going to happen.
Mhm.
And Joseph says to them, okay, hold on.
It's in verse 18.
Okay, there it is. Then his brothers proceeded to fling themselves down before him and said, "Let us be your slaves." But Joseph replied to them, "Have no fear. Can I take the place of God? Even though you meant to harm me, God meant it for good, to achieve his present end, the survival of many people. Therefore have no fear. I will provide for you and your children." By thus speaking kindly to them, he reassured them. Joseph remained in Egypt together with his father's family. He lived 110 years. And then he called his brothers when he was about to die. "I'm about to die. God will surely take care of you and lead you out of this land to the land that he promised on the oath to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob." Then putting the sons of Israel under oath, he continued, "When God thus takes care of you, you must bring my bones up with you from this place." Joseph died at the age of 110, and he was embalmed and laid to rest in a coffin in Egypt. So then whenever the Israelites leave Egypt, they take Joseph's bones with them.
Exactly. And this sets up the book of Exodus.
Right.
And see, so we have here progression through the book of Genesis from creation to having the promised land be owned by them. Even though they all moved to Egypt, they're going to be coming back. And now they're in Egypt, and this makes the setting for the Exodus, because that's where God's saving plan will really become very clear and strong for them, because he, by his power, leads them out of there and ultimately back to the promised land, which there they remain for many, many years.
It's so neat to see how you can read this and see how God's plan comes to fruition through all these things that you wouldn't think would be the way it should happen.
I don't mind reading Joseph's story in here, but I have to say the Broadway show's still my favorite.
It's better. I can use
Oh,
it.
yes. Okay, but still, it's a great story.
It is. It's a really good story. I mean, it's exactly, the kids could read it and they could get what's going on from it really easy.
Oh, yeah, they get it real well.
Yeah.
Sibling rivalry and all the rest.
Right.
Mhm.
So I have some announcements. Tonight's presentation on Genesis marks the conclusion of this series. We hope you'll join us for future Catholic 101 sessions. Our next Catholic 101 series will be on the Sacrament of Penance Reconciliation. This series will begin on Tuesday, November 17th, 2020 at 7 p.m. We encourage you to view this series. We appreciate hearing your comments on this presentation and any suggestions you may have for improving our presentations.
Our closing prayer, the Canticle of Simeon. In the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. Now, Master, you can let your servant go in peace, just as you promised, because my eyes have been the salvation which you have prepared for all the nations to see, a light to enlighten the pagans and the glory of your people Israel. Amen.